think going to be Toad's Place, but the Trop is...
Toad's Place, I don't know. What's that?
Oh.
That place
really?
I never was at.
Wait a second.
Where is that?
Toad's Place?
Not that I'm aware of, no. It's a place to see shows in Philly?
No, it's not. It's not Philly. It's New Haven. This is like the most...
all right.
This is like, for me...
That's a big swing. I mean, we were talking about Philly and you threw a New Haven joint at me.
Here's why, because you mentioned...
I haven't spent much time in New Haven. I do know the pizza joints up there are good, though.
All right, forget about Pepe's and all the other crap up there. What I'm telling... Toad's Place is the most famous small venue in the world.
Okay.
It's the Bethesda, Maryland of venues.
All right.
How do you not know Toad's? I saw Public Enemy at Toad's Place.
I do not know it. Like I said, I have not spent a ton of time up in New Haven.
Who would? Outside of...
Yeah. I'm not a... Honestly, I've spent more time bad-mouthing the state of Connecticut in general than I have in New Haven in my entire life. Just put it all together. But shows in Philly.
Yes. So, second favorite part about doing show, because the most favorite part, of course, is being able to hang with Terry, make some money out there with the chat. I see the news god in the house already. But the second is the live mic interactions that we have before the show. Mike Awesemo producing part of that, so that we can just pop right in. We've got a busy 8 to 10 game slate from DK to FD respectively, but already people chiming in on Toad's Place. Look at that.
There we go.
That's how you know, Terry, that we're in for a good Sunday.
Gotta love it. And I love, that's one thing I love about our crowd too. You throw anything at these guys and they're, somebody in the chat's going to be on top of it. Might not be everybody, but movie references, places to see, shows, God knows, definitely opinions about food. We know that everybody out there loves talking about that. So we appreciate everybody hanging out in the chat and joining us this morning for a weird little slate.
Yeah, it is. It is. And we're going to get into this here because we're going to have to look at it two ways, if you will, because FanDuel has 2 extra games, which is going to impact clearly projections and what we have on site here. And thankfully, nobody in the pre-show chat was mentioning, like, can these guys just get back to DFS, please? Because we hadn't even started yet. So let's look, man, across the board.
I actually assume we were on camera that entire conversation, by the way.
Yes.
I was doing like big smiles and stuff.
We may have to bring it back.
Jokes.
Especially because New Haven pizza now is
right. Apparently that's a thing. But I have been to that Pepe's joint, and I got to say that is some pretty good pizza. It's not New York pizza. It's different. Like, you're talking about a different kind of animal. Yeah. Like when people throw Chicago pizza into the mix and all these things with the big deep dish stuff. Like, there are different types of pizza. Nothing is New York pizza, but that New Haven stuff, the way they do pizza up there is pretty tasty, and that place in particular is pretty damn good.
Well, you've got a couple of fans here already, and News God and some others who are from that area that are definitely going to agree. Because look, my mom still lives there. I've spent half my life in Connecticut. When somebody gives Connecticut a compliment, you just take it and run with it as long as humanly possible. So if it's the fact that you had a good time anywhere, you just run with it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Like I said, I spent most of my time in my life bad-mouthing Connecticut because I had a bunch of friends that went to Boston for school. So I was constantly commuting from like Jersey, New York area up to Boston. And to me, for years, Connecticut was just a traffic jam on I-95 or 91, the alternate route. Yep. Either way you go, you were hitting 2 hours worth of traffic somewhere in Connecticut.
That's why you need to stay on the merit, my brother. But look, that's another conversation, another show. That's for side action. We can talk about highways, and how to get around here. By all means. All right, brother. So overall, you mentioned an interesting kind of weird, what was the phrase, the adjective you used to describe this slate? Because I wanted to follow up on why you use that specific adjective.
I think I said that it was a weird little slate. And partly because we do have 2 extra games on the FanDuel slate, 8 games on DK, 10 games on FanDuel, with one of those games being a Boston Red Sox, Texas Rangers game in Texas, potentially in the heat if the roof is open, and then the other one being a Coors Field game. That's going to dramatically change the nature of the slate on FanDuel. So it's going to be really interesting. I think we got a ton of pitching to work with too, including some guys at very, very cheap prices, some ace caliber pitchers at cheap prices. It's just, there's stuff in all corners. There's value in a lot of pockets. There's places to dump some ownership into. So it's an interesting slate.
All right. So let's jump into it. We'll start in Washington. Mentioned we have 8 on DK, 10 on FanDuel. And just a reminder out there, we want you to hit the thumbs up button. We want you to subscribe. But why don't you wish Mike Awesemo a happy... Now, I don't know. See, I'm just going to say 33, but he looks like he could be anywhere. But I say this as a compliment. Like you could be anywhere from 25 to 50. Like you could hide the wear on your face. Hey, you got some grays in you. All right. Happy 38th birthday.
38 is fair. I was going to put him a little closer to me. I just turned 43 at the end of April, so
you're older than
I'm going to put him right there.
Holy shit! You guys are both older than me. 45.
45. Wow. Woo! God, this guy's ancient.
Take that, chat. All the crap that I get for these old references. I'm the youngest person on the show right now. Oh, Mike just turned 46.
46. Oh, boy.
That. Happy birthday, Mike. Happy 46. Yeah, happy birthday, spent it in Bridesburg, PA. You can't beat that in Philadelphia. See?
Winning a bowling championship.
And a bowling champ.
Come on. What a fun way to win, to celebrate a birthday with all your buddies, winning a bowling title. I assume having some drinks and partying and everything.
Look at that.
See? That ain't so bad.
Yeah, you could tell he's drinking something in that water to help him with the recovery. That's recovery water right there. I know that all too well. All right. So from New Haven to Bridesburg to now Washington, D.C. Let's jump in our first game here. Yeah, nice. Hit that thumbs up button from Mike alone here. It's his birthday. All right, let's start in Washington. And again, we have to look at this from, well, I'm asking, I guess, should we be looking at this now each game 2 times over? Because the FanDuel projections are going to be noticeably different than they normally would be if the slates were equal, correct?
Yeah, they'll be definitely skewed differently, and I should check the site and grab some updates, because I think we did just push updates that include those late games. We'd missed them in the first run. Something went wonky in our tools. So yes, we definitely need to kind of take both perspectives. You've done shows with me before. We'll be lucky to get through 10 games, let alone going through them twice.
I know.
So we'll try and talk fast and hit all the high points. And there will still be a ton of commonality between the two slates. Right. Starting out, you can always say that a common factor between the two slates is going to be Justin Verlander against the Nationals here. Probably a pretty good spot. He's down to a 25.4% strikeout rate from his, high points of 30 plus in his great years. But we're talking about a 39-year-old guy who's come back from Tommy John after 2 years. He's pitching to a 3.26 xFIP. He's only walking 4.2%. He's got a 0.64 whip. That's an incredible whip. He's just not giving anybody the opportunity to score here. So going up against the Nationals lineup, they're decent at avoiding strikeouts. They're decent at creating runs against righties, but it's Justin Verlander. I'm not really worried about him in this spot, and they kind of lack power in the split. They're middling for power, 136 ISO, 2.60% home run rate in the split. So I kind of like Verlander here. I'll take my shares of him. He's kind of low owned on FanDuel for the money, kind of low owned on DK for the money. So I think he's worth some investment. I want to spread out shares, though. We do have a lot of pitching options on this slate. So I'm definitely going to be spreading shares and kind of thin slicing all these guys. That said, 11% ownership on FanDuel. If I'm at 15, 20% on DK, if I'm at 25, even 30 on Verlander here, I can get behind that. I think that's a good price in this matchup for him.
Yeah, clearly the cost is going to impact the ownership there, but not a terrible negative leverage score when you look at a couple of other guys, one including that we'll get to a little bit in Woodruff, who's somewhat of a higher option, not as high as Verlander, but in that range. So the flip side then would be Corbin here, as especially on DK, as a P2 option, as a spend down option, 5,400. We see pretty decent leverage score that you can work with if you had some interest in Corbin.
Yeah, I still don't really, especially not against this Astros lineup. That's the thing that, really gets me. And I know we just saw, who was it, Fede that came out and had a pretty decent, at least a first part of a start. I don't know if he finished strong, but he was cruising a little bit against this team. But this team is elite. They're getting a ton of ownership on the bats. I'd much rather be on the Astros bats in this equation than the Corbin side of it. I pretty much have considered him washed. I know he's been a little bit frisky in spots this year so far, and he's at a very low salary. If you wanted to throw some darts on DK, I think there are better guys that you could do it with than taking Corbin against this Astros team. Maybe a lesser opponent, I would maybe take some shots at that 5,400 price. We're still talking about a 19.9% strikeout rate, a 10.9% walk rate, 1.74 whip, not inducing swinging strikes. He's still allowing hard contact, 45.3% hard hit. I just don't see it for Corbin here. It wouldn't knock me out of my chair to see him put up a okay kind of a start, but I think we're going to need a pretty good start with the pitching that we've got available today. So I'm going to bypass Corbin, much rather get to some Astros bats.
So the bats here, you mentioned the Astros bats. That's a pretty good transition, and you're not getting any leverage. In fact, they're the least leverage score, the worst if you look at negative leverage score we have on DK, because clearly of where that we have them on the top stack and the ownership. But with that said, if you were looking to counter, and we could talk about both here, Terry, but if you were looking to counter Verlander, you're not really getting a lot by getting to Washington. So I don't know how much of a risk that's worth. So you have Houston, who you mentioned. The only drawback there is that there's such a negative leverage score, which you can work around, and you'll tell us how to. And then the other side is, how much of a risk is it even worth taking with Washington that you're not gaining a ton of leverage with the chance of getting over on Verlander?
Yeah, if I get overweight to Verlander, if I, like I said, if let's say it stays at around 10, 11% on FanDuel, let's say I push out to 20%, I'll definitely grab 4 or 5 national stacks at least, just as a little hedge, a little bit of insurance. Juan Soto is the most interesting hitter in that lineup. He's always going to be popular. He's always going to be expensive. He's pulling like 15% ownership on FanDuel, but nobody else on that team is getting any popularity. So I can take a Soto, Bell, Cruz, Yadiel kind of a stack and just throw the middle of the lineup back at Verlander here if I need to. And that's all it would be insurance. I am getting decent home run marks on Soto, Bell, and Cruz. So those would be the targets for me, but not really going to be a priority to get to them. And it would really only be to offset a lot of Verlander ownership. He's projecting really nicely for me. On the Astros side of things, yeah, it's tough at the top. Jose Altuve going over 30% owned on both sites. You get a little bit of an offset with Brantley, but you're back into the 20s with Bregman, with Jordan Alvarez. Yuli Gurriel has had a hot 2 games and is a hitter that I really like and talk about all the time. He's still only 10, 12% owned. So I think you can start with him as far as offsetting some of the popularity. You get a very cheap Aledmys Diaz with 3 position eligibility on FanDuel. I assume his ownership's not populated in my sheet yet, but I assume he's going to be fairly lowish owned. Jose Siri also very cheap on FanDuel at the dead minimum, 2,300 on DK. Very, very interesting. Had a big game last night. I like him coming right back here. Chas McCormick, I would roster his team from 1 through 8, just put it together in different combinations, focus on using low-owned second stacks, low-owned pitchers, and you can get there. I don't think they're tragically over-owned, especially through the middle. I might avoid some Jose Altuve just to offset that extreme popularity. I'll work him into some, but maybe that's my undercut here. But I definitely want to get to Astros against Corbin.
Yeah, and to your point on FanDuel, the 2 extra games has cut the leverage, the negative leverage for Houston in half. So much more workable to the field there. Not that they're not on DraftKings, but just to your point on FanDuel, the 2 extra games has helped your cause there. All right, so is this just fade everything Hunter Green now on the next game?
As in don't play Hunter Green?
And stack as much Pittsburgh as you can?
No, I'm doing the exact opposite.
All right.
Yes, I am probably the biggest Hunter Green fan there is today.
This is a Hunter Green chat.
That's my guy
for the next hour.
This is my guy today.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm always looking for these bargain basement pitchers, right? Even on FanDuel, I do think there's a ton of value in being able to roster somebody in the 6,000 range because of the bats that it buys you. And it's been proving out, particularly this year, but it's been, over time, you can do this because of what stacks you get to. And if you get a day where, you don't get that monster 50 plus FanDuel points performance out of somebody like a Verlander, 50, 60 points, if this kid comes out and gives you 30 something, at 6,200. And we just saw this with Marquez yesterday, who I called out on the show for 6,500 pitching in Coors. Dude went out and put up like a 39-point score. Somebody won yesterday. The winning lineup on FanDuel, by the way, yesterday was absolutely absurd. It was Herman Marquez at the top with all one-offs and just like star caliber one-offs. It happened to be Harper and 2 of the Phillies. I forget which 2, and then all one-offs from different teams who all happened to connect. It was an absurd lineup. Don't do that with your value, but take Hunter Green and start putting together some of the top-end Yankees stacks and Astros stacks. This is a guy that can immediately help you take all those popular and expensive Astros and put them together with a 1.4% owned pitcher who costs 6,200, who's going up against the pathetic Pittsburgh Pirates. That said, I do think there's a lot of value in also stacking up some Pirates against this kid, because this kid does have an 11.8% walk rate. He's got a 1.81 whip. What I like about Hunter Green, and the reason I am going to him, is his 27.6% strikeout rate. He is a premium prospect who they like a lot. He's got a plus fastball, ridiculously good fastball, and a lot of good secondary pitches. He's inducing a 12.2% swinging strike rate. He's given up plenty of hard hit, plenty of barrels. So there are good reasons, like I said, to go to that Pirates lineup. If I'm going there, I'm looking at Brian Hayes. I'm looking at Brian Reynolds, certainly Dan Vogelbach, Yoshi Tsutsugo. Maybe you could squeeze a little value out of Josh Van Meter. And those last three guys I named are like starting to decline in ownership. All the ownership's really just going to Gamble Hayes and Brian Reynolds up at the top. Jack Suwinski, lefty at the bottom of the lineup, 2,900, 2.5% owned on DK. Might be a little bit of interesting too, a little pop in that bet.
How much are you going to get to Green? The ownership is pretty much the same.
Way too
on
much.
FanDuel.
Yeah, way too much.
Okay.
That's my answer.
Because look, he's 2% owned on FanDuel. So you could say I'm heavy overweight on that and get to him, 8% of the time and technically be 4 times over the field.
Yeah.
But you also could be like, hey, I'm going to get to heavy Hunter Green and have him, 20% of your rosters.
I'm not shooting for that, but particularly since I'm on a show and I'm not going to be able to really focus on my lineup sorting, I'm not saying I'm not going to have that. That's not my goal.
Right.
10 would be fine. 10, 12 would be fine.
Oh.
I don't believe in it that much, but I'm just targeting these weak hitters and these strikeouts in this Pittsburgh lineup, right? If we want to look at it, the Pirates so far this year, 23.4% strikeout rate against righties is 21st in baseball. They're 6% worse than average creating runs. They don't have much power to speak of in the split against righties. They're actually decent against lefties. They're 22% better than average creating runs against lefties with a 17% strikeout rate. Against righties, not so much. So I'll take my shots with Hunter Green. That's my value pitcher of the day.
All right. So what about the other side here? Before we look at the bats, because you've invested so much in Green, what does that mean with Quintana?
I probably would take some shots with Quintana as well if I was on DK at 5,600. He's owned at 15.9%. That's probably around appropriate. I don't have our tool immediately in front of me. He might even be negatively leveraged there, but I do think there's some value.
No, I have him at 4.6. He's the highest positive leverage score we have on DK.
Okay. I'm just reloading the tool right now. So let me I'll go with you on that. So yeah, I mean, that makes some sense. He's a guy that we've seen strike hitters out in the past. This year so far over 30 innings, he's only sitting at a 20% strikeout rate, a 10.4% walk rate, 4.16 xFIP, not inducing a ton of swinging strikes, 40.7% hard hit with a 9.3% barrel. There are reasons to believe that some of these Reds, particularly like a Brandon Drury, who's been red hot, a Tommy Pham, who's the best player on that team, it's not a great lineup. I mean, my next righty in the lineup was going to be Albert Almora, and I stopped myself. But there are reasons to believe in some of the capability of some of these Reds hitters coming back the other way. But I do think for that price on DK at 56, Quintana is somewhat interesting. I left him in my player pool on FanDuel, but I don't love it at 7,800. I would just rather those shares go to the other side at 6,200 with Hunter Green here. But if I got, 5 of them around the edges in 150 lineups, I wouldn't be mad about it. I think there's at least a little bit of value against one of the worst offenses in baseball.
Yeah, so good transition there, right, as we start to look at one of those offenses, or maybe both here. But we'll start with DK and just attacking the stacks here. Where do you see as far as, let's start with Cincinnati first, because, I'm sorry, Cincinnati was the highest leverage. I'm sorry. So when I was talking about earlier with Quintana, it was actually Cincinnati stack that we have as the highest leverage against. So that was my fault.
Okay.
But to that point, Cincinnati has a hell of a lot of leverage, Terry.
and to just make sure that you were actually right about what you were saying, Quintana is positively leveraged. Okay. He is our, looks like 5th ranked starter in terms of the probability of being a top 2 on DK, and he's our top value pitcher. So there are good reasons to go there at 15.8% ownership for that 5,600 price. I think he's got a lot of value on that slate. Hunter Green ranks 3rd on our board by probability of being a top 2 starter on DK now. That's a change from earlier. He's shooting up the board now. 9.4 leverage score on that kid, 7.7% ownership. Still too low. I would load up on some Hunter Green here. If it goes pop, it goes pop, but it's a great value opportunity, great leverage opportunity. But the ownership's going up. People are jumping on it now. So obviously I should have kept my mouth shut. It's all what we were just saying.
That's but that's the beauty of it. You need to get that in first. It's like any Discord, right? You place the bet first, then you tell everybody so the line drops. So
there you go.
With that said, though, Cincinnati.
Cut to me pivoting away from Hunter Green as fast as possible.
Right. Well, both are positively leveraged as far as the stacks are concerned, but Cincinnati is going to be the one that's going to get you the most, I think, return with the field.
Yeah, and that makes it a good kind of both sides, right? It's a good play on all four sides. You're getting value pitchers on both sides. You're getting cheapo offenses that are bad offenses, but they're going against, shaky pitching. That's why we're considering the pitching, low owned and shaky. But both of those teams are flawed lineups. Let's not, kid each other about it. We're talking about, I named the good hitters in the Pirates that I would target. On the Red side, it's really about Drury, Pham, maybe some Mike Moustakas. And even that, I don't love lefty. Tyler Naquin in the lineup, lefty is a little weird. Albert Almora was kind of a well-regarded prospect a few years ago, but more like a defense and some speed. I think of him as like a Mike Cameron light type, if that means anything to you. So I don't really think that much of him hitting fifth here. So I just don't love that Reds lineup that's rolled out here. It's just not a good team, but I do think there's some value in targeting, low ownership against a shaky pitcher that is going to get some ownership attention as a value pitcher.
Okay. So we move on to game 3 here on the slate. Tampa, Toronto, a little bit higher now of implied run we have for Toronto. Tampa, not so high, but Manoah and Kluber that we have on the mound. So let's look at that from more of a pitching standpoint. Again, we talked about where there's going to be leverage and the difference on the two slates here. So just looking at what we have here, Manoah is not necessarily, I mean, he's minus 0.02. So he's pretty flat from a leverage score. The price at 9,600 on DK. Let's start there. He is heavily owned. Top 5 we have on the board there, but doesn't take him out by any means.
No, yeah, I think that's very playable ownership. Looking at the DK ownership, 19% is perfectly fine. And I think the 9,600 is appropriate. He's a pretty good pitcher. He's proving himself, as his career goes along. But he's been very good, throughout since his debut last year. 27.7% strikeout rate over 111 and 2/3 last year, 25% over 36 innings this year, 0.89 whip. He's improved that. His swinging strikes are right about the same as last year, 12.8% this year. The hard hit is very, very good, 33.3% hard hit with only a 3.2% barrel rate. He's really good at keeping the power down on the other side. He's suppressing the Rays' power. Even Brandon Lau at the top of that lineup, well under a 10 in my home run model. Everybody else, Randy Arozarena just barely cracks 5, which is like half of the number that we're shooting for, the 10 that we're shooting for. So he's really good at suppressing power. He's good at finding strikeouts. And I don't think he's all that highly owned. I'm looking at a 7.5% ownership projection for FanDuel. Maybe it's gone up a little bit. Like we said, 19% on DK. Yep. That's perfectly playable there. Even if it's a technically negative leverage score, I think just looking at the board where he ranks out, that's worth targeting. I'd rather have that, I think, even at a higher price than, let's say, Robbie Ray at 7,700, 23% owned. Yeah, I'd rather shave off a little bit of ownership and go to the higher ranked kid here against the offense that's not quite as good as the Mets.
Yeah, we talked about Verlander too. Just a quick tail on that. He's 500 more on FanDuel, and you've got a full 5 percentage points more of negative leverage for Verlander as well. So you can apply that kind of thing with Manoah across the board here. Anything changed with Tampa Bay?
Anything changed with them as regard to the stack?
The stack, only because we'll talk about the pitching matchup in a second, but just to correlate what you mentioned as far as what Manoah can do against Tampa, the stacks themselves, again, it's pretty similar to what Manoah's score is getting from a leverage standpoint, but not necessarily owned by any means, I imagine, because of that matchup. So you're not gaining a ton of leverage on the field, but at the very least, it makes Tampa not, -5 or something like that, where it might be tough to get to a lot of their stacks.
Yeah, and it's one of those days where, the middle of the board is, let's say, Toronto at 6.3%. And we go down to 3.7% at Tampa Bay, next to last on the board in terms of the probability mark, but they're owned less than 3% of the time. That's not that big a difference when we're talking about the raw numbers of it, between 6.3% likely and 3.7. Like, that's perfectly fine to take shots on if you're playing that leverage game. If you want to attack some of the ownership on Manoah, I think it's fine to do. What I don't like about it is I do like the hitters in this lineup, but I don't like what he does to power and what he's doing to their power projections in my model here. So I think with 10% of the field going to Brandon Lau, Wander Franco up at the top on DK, 16.7% ownership on Brandon Lau on FanDuel because he's only 3,100 for some reason. I don't know how much I want to get there in hand with a lot of the field. I might look to maybe the middle of the lineup around Howard Ramirez, G-Man Choi, Randy Rosarena. Brett Phillips from the end of the lineup could be a little frisky, but it's not a great spot going up against Manoah. He's a good enough strikeout pitcher, and he's good enough at suppressing power that I would take what I get, but I would definitely be looking to thin slice the Rays here.
Okay, so does that also apply? Well, let's look at Tampa. Let's look at I mean, we have Springs up there as 4K, so depending on where you're looking at this from a Rays standpoint, it might just be a better opportunity to look at the Toronto stack, either appealing or not.
Yeah, I think that's the angle to take here. They're getting a ton of ownership, which is always going to be the problem. Springs, I expect to be like a multi-inning opener. It looks like that's kind of what he's been doing. 4 innings the last time out, 57 pitches, 3 1/3 the time before that, 31 pitches, 43, 32. So he's capable of going like 50 pitches here. So I mean, I don't know that he's going to last that long against this lineup. And I think I'm happy to take some shots with these Blue Jays. They're actually looking at the ownership. It's all fine. I mean, Bo Bichette, 10.7%, Vladdy 9.9. Vladdy, the only hitter over 5,000 on DK. Everybody in the back end of the lineup below 4,000 on DK. That's pretty affordable for this team at relatively low ownership. That's not aggressive ownership. They're a little bit more popular on the FanDuel slate around the top end. Vladdy pushing 17%. Teoscar is around 12%. But again, everybody else, it just drops off the table. And Matt Chapman's still a good power bat. Lourdes Gurriel is a good bat in the back end of that lineup. It's not the best version of their lineup, but it's certainly fine to play. You know, Alejandro Kirk is fine. Santiago Espinal hitting 5th is potentially a little bit sneaky. He's had a frisky start to his season. So yeah, I like going to those Blue Jays. I think they're a little underowned.
Okay. Well, with that, I mean, look, it's not the highest total on the board. We talked about Manoah by all means, so we can move on right up to New York now, to Queens. So, yeah. Okay.
The Queens.
What's the weather like?
Give me the away teams if you can, because that's the way that my my model sorts here, and I have a different order of games than we do on the show. So if you can shout the away team when you.
Yes. Oh no, by all means. And I wasn't doing that on purpose.
I know. It's just sometimes if I get the home team, I'm not necessarily I have to think, all right, who are they playing?
Yeah, but now I may do that.
Makes me a little quicker.
Like 3 games from now, I may purposely just mention the home game just to see your face.
If you want to laugh, yeah, you can do it. And I'll just be, you can watch me sit here in stunned silence.
Wait a second. Who are they playing again?
Together inside my head like Homer Simpson, yeah.
Yes, exactly. Wait, but there are so many different ones you can go to, right? It's the monkey with the symbols, yep. Right? I mean, they're a bunch.
Picking nits off each other, yeah.
Yes, exactly. All right, before we go up to Seattle, New York, all right, Seattle, the Mariners, the visiting team up in Citi Field. Jeff Williams, appreciate the super chat. Definitely not necessary, but we always appreciate it. Jeff Williams, Ray or Scooble for a high dollar single entry on DK, who has the highest ceiling and floor. Happy birthday, Mike. Thanks, guys, for all you do. Thank you, Jeff.
I will agree with our tools on that one. I think it's probably Robbie Ray. You're playing with fire with either one of those pitchers. Scooble definitely has been good and is good, but I don't love the contact that he gave up last year. He's going up against a depleted Orioles lineup that has been bad against lefty pitching, but he's got a ton of ownership on him. He's very, very negatively leveraged on that DK slate, where Robbie Ray is negatively leveraged, but at much less ownership. So if you've got the money, if it's a $1,700 difference, so you are costing yourself a bet by doing that, but I do think it's probably worth doing. It depends on what bat we're cutting out of the lineup to make that pivot. If you're saying like, I can't get, I don't know, Aaron Judge anymore because I'm making that move and now I have to drop down to Aaron Hicks in that lineup instead. That's a pretty big downgrade for pitchers that are grading out fairly equivalently. So it depends on what you're doing as far as leverage in that lineup in that case, right? If you want to keep your high on your expensive bat there and pay the value price for Scooble, now you have to think about that leverage and what you're doing as far as how owned those bats in your lineup are, because you're using a highly owned, negatively leveraged pitcher. I hope that explanation made some sense. In a total vacuum, I would probably put my chips on Ray.
Okay. No, it does. And again, Jeff, we appreciate that big time. All right, so let's get to Seattle, New York here. Carrasco, if you just look at where we are, no, you know what? That's what happened. What happened is I got caught on the top stacks tool because correctly, it now has the starting pitcher own percentage and who they're going up against. So
yeah,
top stacks tool is so much better with more info. I get caught every now and again thinking I'm looking at the top pitchers tool, but no, where we have this now, and again, Carrasco at 8K, on DK. And then for Seattle, it's going to be, as you mentioned, Robbie Ray. Robbie Ray, not to bury the lead here, has a really negative leverage score. Really just Woodruff and Skubal, who's going to come up again, are the only guys. We talked about Verlander in that range. So if you wanted to, you could spend the 8K and get to Carrasco, have a pretty decent leverage score in return, who's not necessarily high owned on the 2-pitcher opportunity you have on DK.
Yeah, I don't dislike the idea of going to Carrasco. I think I'll have some. It probably won't be overwhelming, but he's pitching pretty well, inducing a 13.3% swinging strike rate, only walking 4.1%. It's only translated into a 22.6% strikeout rate overall, but he's got a 1.01 whip, so he's not giving them many opportunities to opposing hitters. He's keeping the ball in the yard fairly well, 35.2% hard hit, 6.7% barrel rate. So the contact profile has been nice. I think the price is good on the DK slate. 8,000. That's probably, you could argue that's a little bit cheap, and he's really not getting the attention that he should for being so cheap. The Mariners lineup is good in the numbers, but the back end of this lineup, with this is the Mike Ford, Steven Souza version of this lineup now. They're not quite as good, I think, as the numbers might suggest. So I think I'm going to take some shots with Carlos Carrasco. Even 8,900, only 4.5% owned on the FanDuel slate. He projects out fairly well for me. So I might actually give him a little nudge when I do my sort in a couple of minutes. He was definitely in the player pool, and I hope I got enough of them that I can get to an effective amount of shares here, because I think I would target, if he's 4.5%, coming in around 10% wouldn't be the worst thing in the world on the FanDuel slate here.
Do you anticipate being, and if you are, how underweight of the field are you to Robbie Ray? We have him at 22.2, but just talked about another couple of options. I know FanDuel was another site that we talked about getting to another option. So Ray at 7,700 on DK may be a little more appealing, especially since you have that second pitcher slot.
Yeah, I'm not Robbie Ray's biggest fan in the world. He was excellent last year, inarguably fantastic all year last year. We're talking about a guy with a double-digit career walk rate who had a career year cutting his walks down to 6.9%. And he was excellent for his bumped his strikeouts up to 32.1. Swinging strikes were 15.5. This year, he's walking 8.6%. The strikeout rate is down at 23.6%. Swinging strikes are still good, but down at 13.3%. His CSW is only 25%. So he's really not throwing enough strikes. He's allowing the same really hard contact that he's always allowed, 41.9% hard hit, 15.4 degree average launch angle. He's a fly ball pitcher. The 7.7% barrel rate is really what saved him from an even more disastrous start to his season. I do think he's going to find it and come into probably not last year's excellence, but better than we've seen him here. He had a decent start the last time out. I think he struck out like 10. So it was a good sign the last time out, struck out whatever it was, 10 and walked 2 or something like that. It's in my article if you want to read it. I just don't love the spot for him here, though. It's not a pitcher that I trust, and it's not a spot that I like going up against this good Mets lineup. So at 22%, I'd probably be under on DK. I think the price is great. 7,700. He's well worth it. I couldn't argue with somebody who said, hey, I'm going to be at the field. I honestly couldn't argue with somebody who said they were going to be over the field because the price is so good. 8,800 on FanDuel is probably around appropriate for how he's pitching right now, but I don't love the 13% ownership. I'll be at around that, maybe 10, 12, somewhere in there, but I'm going to thin slice a lot of these pitchers.
Okay. And it makes sense, right? Especially when you go to the larger slate there. What's that?
I said, I hope so.
Oh, yeah. No, it makes sense to me.
I mean, I just went on like a 3-minute rant. I hope it made sense.
Yes. And it wasn't just the last sentence that made sense, right? Right?
Hey, that's all you need, man. Just as long as you hit him with a good punch at the end, that's all you need.
That's it. That's what they'll remember. Go out on a high note. All right. That's it for me. You've been great, everybody. So stack-wise now, on the flip side of it, especially since you mentioned, not getting to a bunch of Robbie Ray, there's an opportunity here with the Mets. You're not countering a ton of the field here by any means, so there's not a bunch of leverage. But Seattle, on the other hand, with Carrasco, the ownership that he's getting, not necessarily, but more so the lack of ownership maybe that Seattle is getting is, or at least looks like, a pretty good opportunity to gain some leverage on the field, just depending on how confident or just how creative you can get with Seattle stacks.
Yeah, I think they're worth at least exploring because the top end of the lineup's still pretty good. Frazier, France, Crawford, Winker, Julio Rodriguez, Mike Ford for the dead minimum on FanDuel, 2,400. Maybe you get that weird surprise home run out of Mike Ford. I do like Abraham Toro. Steven Souza, I don't think so. It's a lot to ask from Steven Souza. Maybe if this was 5-6 years ago. But that said, he's 2,000 on both sites. So you can plug him in if you're stacking and you're desperate for position, price, ownership offset. I would be mostly looking 1 through 5 and maybe Abraham Toro here. I don't love it going up against Carrasco. What they've been good at is limiting strikeouts, 20.1% against righties. They've created runs 9% better than average, but they haven't hit for a ton of power in the split. And it's kind of the same thing for the Mets on the other side. I was just looking at the Mets numbers against left-handed pitching, and that is worth mentioning because it does play in Robbie Ray's favor there. 25.7% strikeout rate is 26th in baseball. They've created runs 6% worse than average, 1.67% home run rate. The power has been out for the Mets against lefties this year too. So it's a little bit interesting in those two teams, facing off against one another. Plays in the favor of both pitchers. Between the two, I prefer the Mets stack because I believe in all of these hitters, and I think those numbers are really going to come around against lefties. You're just talking about some spectacular right-handed hitters in that lineup, like Pete Alonso, like Starling Marte, like Francisco Lindor when he's on that side of the plate, even Marcana, JD Davis, Eduardo Escobar. So I believe much more in the Mets side of that equation, which is, again, another reason why I'm going to kind of downturn that Robbie Ray there. So I'd be looking at some Met stacks. I'd be looking at some limited Mariner stacks.
Okay. And I mean, I guess you cover as far as like being able to whittle down anything if it's 3 or even 2 or one-offs there. So it doesn't look like there's, or maybe there is an opportunity, but doesn't look like there was a great opportunity because normally you put that in your answer.
Well, I mean, anytime I can get to Pete Alonso under 5% owned on fan or right around 5% owned on both sites, let's say, he's very expensive, but it's Pete Alonso going up against a lefty who gives up a tremendous amount of hard contact. I'm happy to do that, and it's shining through in my home run model. So I will be targeting some shares of like Alonso as a one-off, and then at least the top end of that Mets lineup, if not, 1 through 8.
Okay. Yeah, and that's why I asked.
They're worth getting to.
Absolutely. So next game here, we have Baltimore is in Detroit, Terry. Okay. Baltimore, Detroit. And the chat has been buzzing about Skubal. All right. Baker's boy, Alex, Tariq Skubal on the Skubal, sound like Russo. Tariq Skubal on the mound here.
That's a pretty good Mad Dog.
Not bad. Well, look, when you grow up with listening to him and then working with, I've another show, you and I'll sit there and tell you dog stories for days because I worked there for 2.5 years.
I would love it.
Oh my God.
If you got any Steve Summers stories, I would love those as well.
Yeah, actually, I did updates for like 8 months or so at the Fan, and it was overnight weekend updates. And I got a chance to meet and do some updates with Summers.
I definitely heard you doing those then on like
I'm sure you did.
Long late nights driving home. I mean, Summers was my guy.
We were both blacked out of our minds. You just didn't even know it.
There.
Yeah, exactly. See?
Overnight schools.
Summers. All right, so Baltimore.
Now that we've completely lost the chat.
Right. People halfway around the country. Who the hell is Steve Summers? So let's look at the matchup here. Let's look at the mound here first, right? And let's start with Skubal, just because so much has been buzzing around him. Clearly, he's the most owned that we have on DK, not by a lot because Brandon Woodruff is in there as well. Those two guys catching a ton. But the difference clearly is the leverage. And even with Woodruff, there's somewhat of a pivot off of Skubal because you're spending up. Therefore, there's going to be a little bit less. But at $6K against Baltimore, are you getting to him? And how are you working, if so, this 41% ownership and 24% negative leverage score he has?
Yeah, I think that's a spot where it's just kind of easy to pick up and move off those shares and get somewhere else. I think you can roster some Skubal. Sure. It's a good spot going up against the Orioles. It's not even a good version of the Orioles lineup. They're without Austin Hayes and Ryan Mountcastle, both big righty bats in that lineup. That said, they're still throwing all righties at this guy. He's a very good lefty prospect who is finding his footing at the major league level. 25% strikeout rate, 4.4% walk rate so far this year, 11.8% swinging strikes, all very good numbers. 2.88 xFIP I'll give him as well. Giving up 37.5% hard hit, 6.3% barrel rate. He's really improved those numbers so far this year. We're talking about a 33 2/3 inning sample. Over 149 and a third last year, he gave up a 45.1% hard hit rate with a 13.9% barrel rate and something like a 6% home run rate, one of the worst in baseball. He was targetable for power last year. I don't love it with all that weight of public ownership and all that negative leverage, and that's kind of coming through in our tools. That's why he's ranked in the middle of the board for probability. where he ranks out, if he was the top ranked guy with that much negative leverage, I could at least make an argument for it. I do think there's a ton of value. 6,000, like I was saying about Hunter Green on the other side, 6,000 buys you some nice hitting. Make sure you're spending it wisely, but I would definitely look to undercut that. 25-30% Scooble for me is fine. You're getting a nice chunk of that value, and you're not riding completely down with the field if he crashes and burns. Taking out some shares of the Orioles bats on the other side of the equation is probably worth doing. I mentioned them in my article. They weren't my featured stack, but I still think there's value in Cedric Mullins, Trey Mancini, Anthony Santander, and Jorge Mateo here. The rest of the lineup, take it or leave it. But those 4 hitters, I can definitely stack up, very low owned, going up against that kid who gives up a ton of power, in the long term. I'm happy to take some shots against him, and I'm happy to undercut the field on him.
What about Tyler Wells? Another cheap option here. The difference is you're getting a bunch of positive leverage, not at the top by any means, but kind of like that bottom top tier, if you will, for Wells. 6,900 on DK. So there is some value there in rostering him as your P2. I don't know how excited you would be against Detroit.
Yeah, I mean, if you're casting around for value and you landed on that at price and, total lack of popularity, I don't think it's actually completely insane. Okay. You're talking about a Tigers active roster against right-handed pitching this year, 23.7% strikeout rate is 24th in baseball. Creating runs is at 26% worse than average, is dead last against righties. 1.27% home run rate, also last. 0.086 ISO, also last in the split. So they're not good. He's not a good pitcher. He's not a good strikeout pitcher, 17.3% strikeout rate. He hasn't walked anybody really this year, 4.1% walks. The hard hit is around a little higher than league average. Hard hit was bad last year, 4.11 xFIP last year, 4.30 this year. 13.3% swinging strike rate and a 29% strikeout rate as a reliever last year. There's at least that. You can cling to the idea that he could go out there and strike out a handful of these guys while pitching cleanly for 6,900. It's not the best value mark on the board, though. There's a reason he's downboard in probability.
Now, the flip side would be getting to Detroit stacks to counter the leverage that people would be trying to gain with Wells. So the Tigers stack as a whole, we have, just want to update this here real quick. I mean, they're kind of right there in the middle. So there's no real risk, right, in attacking Tyler Wells here. It's not like we're talking about one of the top rated or projected pitchers here. You're just not gaining a bunch of leverage, which may not be a bad thing so much as it's preventing it from being a deterrent, if anything else.
Yeah, I think that, if we're looking to do that where we're saying, all right, the field's going to be jumping onto that leverage and trying to exploit it, I think that's more appropriate for, when we're seeing these guys that are like, I forget who it was, but like 8% owned with a lot of leverage on them, like we were looking at earlier, where it was kind of, all right, there's going to be some people jumping to that. 8% is enough of the field. 1%, 0.9%. I don't think there's enough of the field on there to justify it from that. And then we're talking about the lineup that I was just reading off all those horrific numbers about. I do think that the Tigers are better than they've been this year. So if you wanted to grab shares of Javi Baez and Austin Meadows, even Jonathan Scope, Spencer Torkelson, certainly from the bottom of the lineup, I wouldn't begrudge anybody those shares in a vacuum. But on this particular slate, Javi Baez is going 16% owned for 4,700 on DK. The rest of those guys are low on, but he's by far the bat that you want in that lineup. On FanDuel, he costs 2,700. He's going to be 32% owned. I can just skip him. I just don't see the reason to go to that. So yeah, there are arguments for, maybe you take a few shares of Tigers here, but the bats that you want are kind of getting that attention anyway. They're very cheap. They're worth taking some shares of, but it's not a big target for me.
Are you getting to Baltimore? And look, I mean, they're coming in DK. We have them at 4.2. So there's a positive leverage, right? But you're countering so much. I mean, 37.2% we have projected, right, with Scooble. So isn't it worth getting to Baltimore, at least as far as you mentioned cost, as far as ownership is at 4.2, at the very least being even to the field, simply with the opportunity to wipe out so many people getting to Scooble?
Yeah, with the understanding that that's the play that you're making, with the understanding that I am not saying that the Baltimore Orioles look really good here and they're going to come out and dominate this game and put up 12 runs. with that perspective, yes, I do think that play makes some sense.
Yes.
It's really going to be focused, though, with the lack of Mountcastle and Hayes in that lineup, is really going to be focused on 4 or 5 guys at the top of that lineup. And it's Cedric Mullins, Trey Mancini, Anthony Santander, and Jorge Mateo. You could stick some Tyler Nevin in there if you wanted to. You could stick some Ramon Urias in there hitting second if you want to. Neither one of those guys is an overly distinguished hitter, though. For me, it's really about the other 4 guys, the 1, 3, 4, 5 hitters. They're all 5% owned on DK and super cheap. They're all 1-ish% owned on FanDuel, also super cheap. So I think they're worth getting to, just given the contact that Skubal gave up all last year, all the home runs that he gave up last year, the fact that all those guys are going to be hitting from the right side of the plate. I think it's worth doing.
Okay.
Don't get carried away with it. Don't throw those into like 75 of your 150 lines.
Right.
That would be bad.
And I wanted you to clarify by all means. That's why I tried to throw you with that. See, I'm not here to derail you by not giving you the away team. I wanted to throw you the softball there so you could explain. This is not Terry saying go Baltimore. It's just countering Skubal what you can. All right, let's move to Miami here. Milwaukee at Miami. So I know Milwaukee has other things going on today as far as a big game 7, but let's look here at the Brewers on the road at Miami. Another reminder, please, if you haven't already, you're hanging with us. 3 things. Now, we've added an extra thing for you. Hit the thumbs up button. Make sure you're subscribed here to the community as well as the Odd Shopper community. And wish Mike Awesemo, who's producing a happy, 46th? I forget now. 46th rate.
I think you said 53.
No. We can't do him like that. You can only say that if you're younger than the person you're making fun of. Are you?
I am. I'm younger than him. I'm older than you.
Yes. See, I can say that to you. You can't say that to me, but then you can say that. We both can say it to Mike.
Right. Yeah.
Oh,
you guys got to be punching up. You can't punch down.
Yeah, it's amazing. All right, so let's move on. Milwaukee at Miami. And now Butthole has been asking for a little bit as far as home run props. I threw out Cron and Perez because he made me some money last night, and I saw there was a pretty good number on one of the books to jump back on there. But you're the man with home run picks. You write them, you pick them, you predict them. So Butthole is going to keep chatting us until you answer him. You know that, right? He's one of our favorites. So that's what it's all about.
Of course. And he's, he progressively gets a little bit more enthusiastic about those chats usually if we don't answer right away. So let's make sure we clean that up. The leading team in my power index today was the Milwaukee Brewers, who we're about to talk about here. And several of those players are at the very top of the home run board. Christian Yelich was actually my home run pick for the day. But I think Rowdy Tellez looks fantastic. And Hunter Renfroe actually rates out at the very top of my board overall. It's Hunter Renfroe and Vladdy Guerrero at the top with Rowdy, and then Pete Alonso into Jordan Alvarez if you want the top 5. I hope that satisfies our pal. I just gave him 6 home run picks. Hopefully he's stringing those together. Maybe parlay a couple of them. I don't know. Get wacky with it. Make some money.
Okay.
I like a couple of those to come through.
Be nice, Bean Dude. We love Butthole. I'm going to show that just because the chat wanted me to mute it. All right, let's move on. Milwaukee at Miami. And I have to be honest, when we turn this 8 into 10 and we wasted like the first 6 minutes talking about Bridesburg and Mike's birthday and some other shit at the start of the show, I thought we'd be racing, but we're doing all right. For Terry Eytan time, we're doing okay, I have to say.
Yeah, I think we're doing just fine. I don't think we're going to be all that rushed toward the end.
Yes, absolutely. Which is a nice thing. You and I, we don't normally have that.
Yeah, right. Sure. That's how it'll go.
Yes, exactly right. We'll spend time patting ourselves on the back and then run out of time.
Exactly.
So let's go here. Milwaukee at Miami. Let's start with the pitchers. Yeah, I got caught again. Let's start looking at the mound. And, if it's Hernandez at 6,500, you're going to gain a little bit of leverage here. That cheaper option. The flip side is a guy that we did talk about in Brandon Woodruff, but I mean, if anything, similar scenario to Skubal. He's a little bit higher though of a top 2% pitcher. You're spending up 3,000 more on DK. I get that, but you're not. The ownership is pretty much the same, and you're gaining about 8.5 points of leverage. Still negative 15.6. But if you were looking. I know the price may not add up to a pivot, Terry, but if you were looking to pivot away from somebody who had the worst leverage, Woodruff is kind of like a meet you halfway.
Yeah, and I do like targeting those guys, especially when they're premium pitchers like he is. So I think that's worth looking at. He's definitely a high-end pitcher, 29.4% strikeout rate this year, 3.35 xFIP, 13.3% swinging strike. The whip is a little bit high, 1.36 whip so far this season, giving up a little bit of uncharacteristically hard contact, 42.9% with a 10.4% barrel. Over 179 and a third last year. That was 32.4% with a 5.8% barrel. I expect him to come back to earth with those numbers and be, much more the good version of the contact profile there. And the strikeouts are going to hold up. He's a very good pitcher against an improving Marlins lineup, but one that I don't think he's going to see any problems with. So I think there's definitely reason to be enthusiastic about Woodruff here. You can always fire away with him if you're at or about the field. I don't really have anything negative to say about that. I think that's probably where I'm going to be.
Now, Hernandez, a little bit more leverage you can work with here. The cost, clearly, you can work with as well. So do you see yourself being maybe equal or a little over the field at that 5.3 we have projected on DK? And just to throw it out there on FanDuel, because we do have the extra 2 games, he's a little bit less, but still like less owned. So if you like him on DK, I imagine you'd like him even more on FanDuel.
Yeah, I'd say on the one, I think he's got a little bit of value actually on the 2-pitcher site. I don't know how much I'll get to him on the FanDuel slate. He is a pitcher I believe in terms of, I think he's a talented kid. He had a 23.6% strikeout rate last year. I think there's maybe even a little bit more to give in the strikeout department, but we haven't seen it yet this year. 21.1% strikeout rate this year, a 4.58 xFIP, 1.42 whip, not inducing swinging strikes. And it's weird. He's given up an 11.7% barrel rate, but only a 33% hard hit. But he's managed to give up 8 home runs and a 6.0% home run rate so far. So that's what's translating across to all those Brewers home runs that I was calling out there. I think I'm probably going to just bypass the pitcher as far as FanDuel is concerned. You can take a few shots at 6,500 if you're going to one $6,500 pitcher on DK. I don't think there's any reason not to go to several of them. So just spread out some of those shares at the value level, and he's worth doing that with. I think the Brewers' power is going to come through on this one, and I'd rather be on that side of the equation here. There's a lot of low-owned power bats in that lineup that I like. That said, if you're stacking Brewers on DK, they're crazy expensive.
Yes, and that's a really good transition there. It's almost like you've done this from both chairs. Let's look at the Brewers, because you're still right as far as cost is concerned. You're right, but low-owned. And still, I'm a little surprised here. I want to run it just again, but they're gaining a positive. And I understand as far as cost is concerned, but from a matchup standpoint alone, I'm a little surprised that they're a 1.4 positive leverage.
Yeah, that's a great spot. They were my featured stack this afternoon. I really like it. Like I said, leading my power index. And we're talking about a lot of hitters that I kind of like. I started out the year saying, I don't know how this lineup's going to come together, but they've been fairly effective. Christian Yelich really starting to come around. 258, 350, 467 so far this year. 208 ISO, creating runs 30% better than average. 5 home runs so far this year. And what I love is that the launch angle's back up. 9-something degree average launch angle after being suffering at 2 degrees last year and hitting everything dead into the ground. 9-degree average launch angle is approaching the 11 and change that he had a few years ago when he was the MVP. Just saying. He's got a 56.2% hard hit rate this year, 18% barrel rate this year. Just saying. Watch out for the Christian Yelich freight train over the next few weeks. He's coming. Rowdy Tellez, Hunter Renfroe. Absolutely love those 2 bats in this lineup. Luis Urias back in this lineup. Super cheap in the middle of the lineup. 3,000 on FanDuel, 3 position eligibility, hitting cleanup. Nobody going there. Under 3% owned on both sites. Colton Long and Willy Adames up at the top. There's a lot to do with this lineup. I really like it. I can take or leave all of Omar Narvaez, Tyrone Taylor, and Jace Peterson at the bottom of the lineup. If you need a catcher on DK, it's perfectly fine to go to Omar Narvaez. That said, one of those guys will probably now have a monster game since I said I could take or leave him.
That's fine. Now,
shoot a Tyrone Taylor double dong.
Well, somebody was asking for a double dong earlier. So there you go.
There you go. That counts. If he does it, I called it. That counts.
Absolutely, right?
To be fair, he is over the magic number in my home run model. That's how much power Eliza Hernandez is yielding in this one.
Hey, the biggest myth ever purported in sports is that you have to call glass. All right. I don't care how that thing gets in there. All right.
As a very mediocre basketball player. Damn right.
Exactly. All right. So what are you doing then on the flip side with Miami? Because we talked about just Hernandez and how you're approaching that, but with the stack itself against Woodruff.
Yeah, probably not the spot for it. I can definitely get behind the idea of grabbing a Jorge Soler here and there. Jesus Sanchez leading off is maybe somewhat interesting because he's cheap and he's left-handed. He's a good prospect, decent bat, but it hasn't really come through. I just don't love taking those shots against excellent pitchers like Woodruff here, particularly guys with these aggressive strikeout rates that are just most likely going to put a lot of holes in this lineup. So it doesn't really appeal to me as a stack. They're very low on, they're cheap. If you wanted to take some shots against a very highly owned Woodruff, if you for some reason don't believe in him, think that the hard hit profile this year, for example, is real, then yeah, Sanchez, Jesus Aguilar, Jorge Soler, Avi Garcia, those are your guys.
Okay. So let's move on then, right? Because I think we covered both sides there. Yankee, your squad. I know you have this. I didn't even need to tell you who the road team is. I could just say, hey, the White Sox playing a baseball game in Chicago.
That one I might have been able to come up with.
Little bit here. Now, I mean, Judge with the home run, he's been money making here as far as betting if you find the right number. So let's just look. We'll get to the Yankees stack in a second, but countering that and trying to take advantage of any real value on the pitching matchup where we have, and I just want to get back to DK here. I mean, it's really just a matter of what you're spending versus leverage for the pitching matchup, because both guys are going to cost you some money and both guys are super high. Outside of your boy Hunter Green, these two guys on the mound in this game are the highest positive leverage pitchers we have.
Yeah, I think the field is not quite ready to pay $10,000 for Nestor on DK, 10-2 for Nestor on FanDuel, particularly not against this White Sox lineup, which is where I think the real issue comes in. He's been fantastic. I got totally on board. I mean, he won me a ton of money, so I can't ever say anything bad about him ever again. I'm not sure how convinced I am, to put it completely nicely, that this will be the way that we think about this pitcher at the end of the year. But right now, nothing bad to say about the guy. 33.9% strikeout rate, at 2.71 xFIP, a 0.97 whip. If you've been listening to us talk about him, you know how he pitches. Low end 90s fastball and just keeps hitters off balance. He changes up his timing. He changes his arm angle. He changes his release point. He really messes with hitters and keeps them off balance. But he's going up against an excellent, heavily right-handed White Sox lineup that does not strike out that much against left-handed pitching. This year so far, the active roster for Chicago, fifth in baseball with an 18.3% strikeout rate, second creating runs, 34% better than average against lefties, showing some power against lefties. I don't love the spot for Nestor here, but I think it's easy enough and well worth it to get over the field on him, just given the performance and the sustained performance. 93 innings last year was a 27.5% strikeout rate. He's improved going into this year, but I mean, he's sustained it. It's kind of maybe possibly sort of maybe real. I don't know. There's a question mark on the end of that for a reason. I'm not totally confident, but I think the ownership is so low that it's worth doing. Kopech on the other side of it, I think, is probably priced about right. He's going up against a Yankees team that is actually surprisingly good at not striking out against righties this year. Tons of power in that Yankees lineup. That said, he's an excellent strikeout pitcher, 26.3% strikeout rate this year. He's walked 11.4% against a very patient Yankees lineup that does draw walks, knows how to get on base. So I'd be a little bit concerned about that. At no ownership, though, you can absolutely take some shots. There are the heavy strikeouts around Stanton, Joey Gallo. All the Yankees power hitters are going to strike out a lot. So they're also the same guys that are going to hit the ball out of the park or walk against this kid. You're playing with fire, but I think it's worth doing at the low cost, low ownership for that kind of a profile of a pitcher.
So I think what we did with Nestor and Kopech, we can kind of do with the bats as well, which is they're both similar in where they are from projections, just like the two pitchers were. So if you're getting to both stacks and they both succeed, then you basically, with the leverage that you have with both pitchers, you may be able to work something. And to be fair to both of these stacks, neither one of them are super negatively leveraged either. Granted, I mean, 8 games here on DK, but still, neither one of them are at the bottom with Minnesota and Houston.
Yeah, and that's what you like to see. When these teams go thin, even if it's not technically positive leverage, anytime I can get to these White Sox bats particularly going up against a lefty who's not a flamethrower of a lefty. I know Nestor's striking out 30+%, but he's not a hard thrower. These guys can put the ball in play against Nestor. They're only 5.2% owned overall. So even if it's efficient ownership, it's a 0.0 leverage. I think those bats are worth going to. I think those bats on the Yankees side of things are definitely worth going to against Kopech. Like I said, he walks a ton of guys. They're super patient. They've got all that power. So you can fire away with both of those stacks. I like the idea idea of getting over the field on the White Sox. The Yanks come in maybe around the field. They're around 10% owned as a stack, but there are individual hitters that I think you can jump into that are somewhat low owned, like Anthony Rizzo, Giancarlo Stanton, even on FanDuel, 5.4% owned. Josh Donaldson, single digits. A lot of single digit ownership. I see we're getting a bunch of messages over here.
Well, no, that's me making fun of me earlier saying, ha, we're doing great with time. And then looking up like, shit, we've got 10 minutes and 3 games. Here we are. We predicted this.
Do we have 10 or 20? I think we have 20, don't we? We're going to 35, aren't we?
Oh, yes, we have 20 minutes.
Clock is 35, I believe.
Woo! Okay, much easier now.
I haven't even entered lineup 1 yet.
Disregard everything I just sent you in Slack. Absolutely. All right, so looking at it, though, and, the one-offs, I think you can definitely identify, but are you getting to, in this scenario where both of these stacks against high leverage pitchers, are you working any smaller 2 or even 3-man stacks? Can you with this?
I'll always have 4 3s on FanDuel. I'll have 4 4s and 4 3 1s primarily, but I have been letting in a little bit of like 4 2 2s, a little bit of like 4 2 1 1s, like, just to capture some of these oddball performances that we've been getting and to, maybe kind of try and offset the dead ballness. That said, most of them have kind of underperformed. So I'm still a believer in stacking. I'm still looking to stack. You can certainly grab any of these power bats as one-offs from either one of these teams, though. Everybody on FanDuel, rather, on the White Sox is owned under 5%. On DK, everybody but Tim Anderson is owned under 10%. Only Luis Robert is owned over 5% in that subgroup. The Yanks on DK are getting a little bit of attention. On FanDuel, they're completely underowned. So I think you can get as aggressive as you want to with either one of these teams. If you don't believe particularly in either one of these pitchers, you can load up against him here. It's if you have that kind of a feel. And I would throw in that the White Sox are actually pretty cheap on both sides.
Yeah, that's another thing is
everybody cost below 5,000 on that team is a misprice.
Yeah, a good call on that. That does seem a little odd. Why is that? Is that recency?
I imagine some recency against Nestor. Yeah, just looking at Nestor as if he's Garrett Cole here, they priced him down a little bit for this spot. But yeah, Luis Robert 4,800, Jose Abreu in particular 4,300. AJ Pollock is better than a $3,700 DK player. Timmy Anderson should be well over 5,000 already. That's some weird pricing. They're definitely priced down, I guess, for the matchup.
All right, so I think we can move on now to Minnesota. Covered a bunch there. So Cleveland on the road in Minnesota here, and looking at the pitching matchup, just overall, we have McKenzie and Ryan, and McKenzie was a guy that you referenced. I think it was Carrasco who you were specifically referencing, but somebody in that 7.5 to 8.5 ownership range that's still getting positive leverage as a pitcher. And when I was looking at that example, I think it was Carrasco because we talked about him, and now you have Tristan McKenzie who also fits that bill at 7,400 on DK. The flip side of that is going to be Joe Ryan, who's going to be 1,000 more, but still getting some positive leverage under that 10% ownership.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's 2 really good young pitchers squaring off against 2 teams that have been just brutalizing right-handed pitching. So neither one of them is really in a good spot here. I don't know how much I need to get carried away with chasing the young pitchers. I do like both of them. I just prefer matchups in other spots. I think 9,200 on FanDuel, 9,400. There's probably just other pitchers that I want to spend that money on the FanDuel slate. So I'll have a few shares of each guy because I do believe, and I do think that the ownership is low enough that if I go, let's say 5% on each one, I'm not going to damage my portfolio if they get lit up, and I might capture a high upside game. So I think they're worth doing that with, but I'm not looking to like really overextend on either one of these guys. If we're looking at McKenzie, a 26.1% strikeout rate, he's great. Joe Ryan, 24.4% right there. But we're looking, jump over to the board and look at the Twins against right-handed pitching, 21.6% strikeout rate, 23% better than average, creating runs, is 4th best in baseball, showing some power with a 3% home run rate, a 165 ISO. Cleveland has been one of the better teams in baseball against right-handed pitching so far this year. Looking at them as I jump down to that one, 18.6% strikeout rate is 4th, 32% better than average, creating runs against righties is 2nd. Young pitchers in this situation, I just don't love targeting it. I think they're priced up on FanDuel. To the contrary, on DK, 7,400, I can make a stronger argument for taking some shares of Tristan McKenzie as a value pitcher. I think the leverage is worth playing there, even with that quality that the Twins show. Some of that isn't around a guy like a Luis Arias offset some of that because he's a 7.3% strikeout guy. So there are some strikeouts hiding in that lineup. He could have a good game. I think at that price, he's worth maybe, getting to double the field, a little bit more than that on the DK slate. 8,400 for Joe Ryan. Similar story, but probably not quite as much value in doing it.
Yeah, and 9,400 on FanDuel might take Ryan not all out of the conversation, but continue to push him towards that.
Yeah, I really think that's, and that's probably why he's so low owned, that and the quality that the Guardians have shown against righties so far. But like I was saying, once he drops to below 2% ownership, now it's kind of more appealing the other way, where I can say, all right, I can double, triple the field without really risking very much. So I can pay that 9,400 a few times and take out some shares, have more than the field. If he gets that good game, great. If he gets lit up, I don't really mind.
Good point there, as far as you're not totally invested. So now the flip side, or the other side of it, would be the offense. And you mentioned getting, or maybe not getting to Ryan as much just because of circumstances surrounding Ryan, strikeouts to be found in the matchup. So how does that correlate to you getting to these stacks specifically? Cleveland is somewhat there, like minus 0.03. Minnesota is going to be the one that you're going to have to work around negative leverage and ownership as a result of that. On DK, at least the 8-game slate, they're catching double-digit shares at 10.2%. The other side of that is Cleveland, who is not catching really anywhere near that, but still dealing with somewhat of a negative leverage score. Again, it's minus 0.3, so it's not, I don't want to make too much of it.
Yeah, it's not crazy bad. And to further that point, most of the ownership on both teams is going to the star player. It's mostly on Jose Ramirez on the Guardians. It's mostly on Byron Buxton on the Twins. And after Buxton, you immediately get 13.5% on Gary as the catcher on DK. Everybody else in single digits. That's easy enough to roster in combination with one another. You get some good players in there: Jorge Polanco, Max Kepler, Gary certainly can be in that, a part of that. Royce Lewis down at the bottom of the lineup for 2,300, only 6.3% owned. Definitely worth grabbing. Hit a grand slam the other day. Star player or premium prospect, presumably on his way towards stardom. 2,100 on the FanDuel slate at 0.9% ownership is certainly intriguing there. They're all very low owned outside of Byron Buxton on the FanDuel slate. Everybody's single digits. And the same thing's true about the Guardians. Even Jose Ramirez on FanDuel is below 10% ownership. He's at 17.6 on DK. Everybody else in the low single digits. So you can definitely stack both sides. And I think it's worth doing here. Both teams very good against righties, like we've been saying. Look on the Guardian side to Steven Kwan, Jose Ramirez, Owen Miller, Ahmed Rosario, and Andres Jimenez. I've talked about a lot on the last couple of shows. I think they're very interesting for cheap multi-position eligibility on both sites. Franmil Reyes, ton of power in the middle of that lineup. So I definitely like getting to stacks on both sides of this one. I think they're probably under-owned and a little cheap.
Awesome. Love it. It's nice and succinct. Nothing left to add there. Unless you were going to sneak in a one-off, I think we're good.
No, I think we're good on that one. I've got some trimming on these lineups to do, so I can let you talk for a sec.
Well, how much do you need here? Because if I'm going to filibuster,
go ahead. I mean,
Boston and Tech. See,
I have a bunch of plug
plays
or something, you can read it, but
No. I can do a read here. It's a shame because if you needed that time between the next game, then I could give you the 3-leg same game parlay that I've built.
Let's talk one more game and then we'll do that.
Well, let's go through Boston and Texas. I know you have some stuff to do, so let me remind the world here to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe, of course, wish Mike Awesemo a happy birthday. And also, look, we're constantly breaking things down for you as far as cost so that it's easier for you to be a part of our community. So the Awesemo Plus tools, everything that you're going to get out there, top stacks, top pitchers, lineup builders, everything. We don't have those on Sunday. So if you're hanging with us on Sunday hoping for a freebie today, you ain't going to get it. That's why we want you to be a part of the $29.99 a week. Here's the thing, $18.95 a week will get you the MLB package. That's as low as it is. But so you don't hit Terry up with a bunch of emails once you sign up, the Fantasy Cruncher is an add-on that you have to put in on checkout. So don't do that and then forget and then email Terry, hey, I'm part of this thing. I don't get FC. It's an add-on, but it's easy to do. It's really a simple process to be part of everything here. And it's only $18.95 a week for the MLB stuff, but you really want everything across the board for an extra $10. It's that simple.
I don't love that. And we do get those emails. Everybody out there is probably saying, everybody knows that Fantasy Crunchers and Eytan. Who do that? We get them. I assure you. But yeah, guys, you gotta if you're out there playing MLB and if you're watching our shows and you're not jumping in here and exploiting these tools and using everything that we talk about, you're just missing out. It's so worth it. The only proof that you need, the only sales pitch we need for these things is look at the top of standings on every single baseball slate and tell me you're not seeing our logos. We're just all over it. So get in there, insane. Stop guessing, start winning.
Honestly, it's insane how much you see the Awesemo logo everywhere.
It really is. I mean, every single night. It might be, it might be me one night. The next night it's Eddie. The next night it's Steve. I mean, the guys who work for the site are all over it. But more to the point, we've got members constantly winning. We've got people tweeting the Hall of Fame all the time. I'm just constantly, every time I go on Twitter, I've got 10, 15 notifications from people just tweeting us great screenshots. I love it. It makes me feel good. It validates all this stuff that I say on these shows.
All right, so before I can get to my huge 3-leg same game parlay, that's going to hit, watch you, just because we never do it, so why the hell not? Let's get Boston. Now, this is FanDuel only here because DK doesn't have these final 2 games. So if we're just looking at it from a FanDuel standpoint, you want to start with Boston and Tanner on the mound there. We also have the Rangers where you're going to get a little bit more leverage with Perez, but really those 2 guys you can start at from a cost standpoint, pretty significant as far as $2,400 difference.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much I would go to either one of these guys. I mean, Tanner Houck, you could certainly say 6,200 has the prospect profile of a guy like a Hunter Green. I believe in the talent in this Rangers lineup a little bit more than that Pirates lineup. So if I'm going for value, I'd just rather attack those Pirates than these Rangers. But you could argue for a few shares of them here, maybe 22.8% strikeout, 10.9%. So he's got those same aggressive walks, but he's not getting the strikeout numbers that Green is, which is another reason I prefer Green. But if you ended up with a couple of value shares, I don't think it's completely crazy, just given how bad the Rangers lineup has been. That said, I do think it's worth probably taking out some shares of the Rangers going up against him on the other side. Martin Perez, I could take or leave. I don't really need to tangle with this Red Sox lineup with this much pitching on the slate. 19.4% strikeout rate, a .99 whip. He's Martin Perez. He's going to do Martin Perez things. Every now and then he'll post one of those weirdo 35-point slate relevant starts on FanDuel. 8,600. If you got that from him today, you'll finish, in the top couple hundred, but probably won't win the tournament.
Yeah, that's the big thing. Ain't winning a tournament, then stay the hell away, ultimately.
Yeah, that's it. I think he's too expensive for the most likely scores that he's going to give you, even on a good day. So I don't think that's going to give you the leg up that we actually, would need from him to pay off there.
No, that makes sense. Now, let's get over to FanDuel here. From a stack standpoint, how much does what you just laid out with the pitchers, how much is that factoring in, getting to either or maybe both of these? Texas both are going to be a positive leverage play here. But it looks like with Boston, especially with the lower ownership, you may be able to work something. Lower across the board. Texas is lower ownership than Boston. I just meant Boston, lower ownership across the board.
Yeah, and I'm not entirely sure what they're doing with the roof at the park here. It was supposed to be super hot. It was in the 90s again, so it should be pretty favorable hitting conditions here. I think you can get away with both stacks. Definitely the Red Sox side of things. Every single hitter in that lineup in the single digits. Everybody below 4,000 on the FanDuel slate. Happy to go there. $2,100 Bobby Dahlbeck hiding at the bottom of the lineup there, but definitely the Devers, JD Martinez, Bogarts, Trevor Story, juicy middle there. Even Enrique Hernandez for 2,700 multi-position off the top. You can stack up Red Sox here. A little less enthused about the Rangers side of that equation, but I think, the Marcus Semien, Corey Seager, Jonah Heim, Adolis Garcia, Cole Calhoun portion of it may be worth getting to. Brad Miller as a wraparound for 2,800 from the bottom of the lineup. A lot of hard contact at the bottom of the lineup there. So limited interest in the Braves, more interest in the Red Sox side of that.
Yeah. Now, interested as far as the Rangers.
Limited interest in the Rangers. I would have some shares, but not a lot. More interest in the Red Sox side since they're so low owned. And I know they've struggled, but I do believe in those bats long term. So I think they'll be there.
Yeah, and again, the thing is, you mentioned the ownership, the low ownership. I mean, they really are, and maybe that does have to do with the roof, but somewhat. But they really are compared to the rest of the field and what you're gaining on Texas, especially from a pitching standpoint. Is there anything else?
Yeah, everybody's down on the Sox, and I think there's good reason to continue going there. Like, they just popped the other night and had a nice game and very low ownership, and I think they seem primed to do it again here. So I think it's a spot worth keeping an eye on long-term and worth attacking anytime they come up low on like this.
And look, we're going to get to the final game here with Colorado and Kansas City. Those are going to be the top two projected stacks. When you're in Colorado, it makes sense for that.
And everybody can guess what I'm going to say about Coors Field here anyway.
I'm sure. But, the point about Boston being real quick is that while you're not gaining a ton of leverage, they're just at a point or below that on FanDuel. They have low ownership. They're not projected to be the top stack, but on a 10-game slate outside of Coors Field, they're right there at the top. So I think it's worth, my point being is that the data would indicate, and you can clarify, that it's worth a risk of getting over at least, or if not equal, then over that 4.1.
Yeah, absolutely. I think anytime you're seeing a leverage situation like that, you can definitely start looking into pushing additional shares and trying to exploit that. That's what the tools are indicating. That's what the tools are there for. So yeah, I have great faith in those leverage numbers, and it's kind of how I push my lineups around and what I'm trying to do right now here behind the scenes before we run out of time.
Well, look, if you need, we've got 4 minutes.
I could use hearing about that triple play that you
Let's do it. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 3 bets that I've found that are plus EV. So the number where I bet them, and it's all the same book, a little bit better than what's projected based off Penny and others. So the 3 legs, now one of them is a risk. I get it. And that's why there's a plus 220 thrown in on this. It's a 3-leg same game parlay for the Rockies and Royals and Coors. It's going to pay out plus 1362. I'll just take the obvious one that's the risk off the board right away, and that's Salvador Perez hitting another home run. But if you look at what we've seen so far, and I don't know where he is on your home run model, but to get him at 220 was still a good number. So that's why that first leg, and this is important for me, Terry, to explain the numbers of each leg so people don't think that I'm trying to have, like a minus 550 go to 300 and play the parlay that way. No, it's actually taking 3 legs. So Perez going long at plus 220. I like Daniel Lynch, 5K. So I went alternate over 4.5 at plus 136. Again, I like that number there. And then lastly, I go Rivera, 2+ total bases at plus 105. So those are the 3 legs. Have at it. Destroy, crush, kill, whatever you want.
All right. I just threw some lineups in there. We'll find out what's in them later on. Let me see where I got Daniel Lynch in terms of the strikeout number.
That would be key here, yes.
We're walking a fine line. What was that number? 5.5?
No. 5+. So I went over 4.5 as an alt.
Ooh, we're there. I got him at 5.4.
Nice. Now,
there we go.
Rivera,
I don't know that I believe in it.
I'm sorry?
I don't know that I believe in it in Colorado. I don't love the pitching environment there. Obviously, he could get chased awfully quick.
Sure.
But it's projecting out. It's there on the board. So yeah, let's do it. I like it.
All right. Now I just need the other 2 to come through.
There you go.
What was everybody going to assume that you were going to say about Coors Field? Let's start there here.
I think they were all assuming, if they've ever seen me talk about Coors Field before, that I was going to say that both of these teams, in terms of the stacks, are super highly owned, that the field is getting really aggressive about them, that you want to look for the low owned guys, the leverage. Maybe a Carlos Santana is interesting at only 9.1% on FanDuel. Everybody in the Rockies lineup is super highly owned. They were the team I was targeting a little bit more, some of that right-handed pop against lefty Daniel Lynch here. Like a CJ Cron, I thought was really interesting. Obviously, Connor Joe, both of those guys are 31% owned. So I'm going to be undercutting the field again on the Rockies side of things. I might take out some shares of the Royals, but I'll probably be underweight to them, and I'll definitely be under on both pitchers. I do think Gomber's talented, and that's why I think he's going to potentially suppress the Royals lineup, but I'm not going to try and roll the dice on Coors Field pitching 2 days in a row. We got lucky with that. Well, no, we got away with Herman Marquez yesterday. I think we're good there. We don't need to roll the dice with Gomber here, but I wouldn't be totally surprised to see him just suppress the Royals side of things to the point where I'm glad I don't have a ton of them.
Now, for stacks purposes, right, as we wind down here, people getting in locks and all, both at the top projected as such. So if you're staying away from the pitching, I imagine that's going to be more bats here.
Yeah. I would not roster really the pitchers, maybe a share or 2 of Gomber if you need to do it for some reason, but it would be about the bats. But again, they're just seeing so much weight that my typical approach to Coors Field is just going to be the undercut and get away from the public and try and win it elsewhere. And that's kind of, even with Coors going off the last few days, that's still kind of worked out. If you're following along, all the top scorers, like there's a lot of Coors up there, but there's also been a ton of LA Philly up there. The Yanks were up there the first 2 days of the weekend, kind of disappointed yesterday, but they'll probably be right back. So I think there's plenty of fireworks on the board that you don't necessarily need to go to Coors.
Love that. Especially because, again, I'm sure a lot of people were anticipating the opposite. So we even got that in pre-lock for you to take advantage of that. And yeah, I see the projected run totals, probability and all, but I'm rolling with Lynch today. All right.
Yeah.
And it'd be nice if Sal can get me
that
one.
Lynch strikeout prop was there in my projections. So, I mean, even without trying to humor you or placate you or your ego or anything, I'm sitting here saying you were right according to the numbers.
You know, it's not often.
Nice.
See, that would be nice. It would be nice. We appreciate everybody hanging.
What do you know, you young whippersnapper?
Me? No.
Yeah,
you can't.
You're just some young punk kid here.
I know.
Get off my lawn.
I wouldn't know. Right. Now you got to hit me with the true like dogism, right? Like, you wouldn't know Patrick Corbin if he fell on you. Yeah, something like that.
So good. That is a really good dog. I gotta say, I wish I could do an equally good Francesa so I could answer back, but I don't think I got it in my bag.
Oh, Chris. Yeah, well, I can't do that. It's hard.
I mean, a solid. I actually do have a great Francesa impression. Hold on, you ready? You watching me? hey, whoa, yeah, the Giants this year.
Right. I know him as Alphonse. All right. Appreciate it as always, brother. At DigitalB21. Keep hitting Terry up as we've been talking about it. You see the Awesemo moniker on there all the time, the avatar on there all the time when people are winning. So we appreciate your tweets. Hit us up at DigitalB21.
Hey, let me throw something to the people. I thought of a little thing. If you happen to see my handle in the top 3 as a Hall of Fame qualifying win, grab a screenshot of it and tweet it to our Hall of Fame, and we're going to put everybody into a raffle, and we'll give away the free month that way, so that if I happen to get there again today, we'll give it to somebody else and we'll generate a bunch of activity.
Wow, that's awesome.
Give me a good reason to finish up top.
That's awesome.
I think that's something we should start doing whenever one of us finishes in the top 3.
Yeah,
just raffle it off, generate a little bit of generate a little bit of activity. But if it happens to be me today, that's the offer. Anybody else, it doesn't qualify.
Really? So, like, if Ehrenberg is there, he's gonna be selfish and not do that?
I mean, I didn't actually talk to anybody or get any kind of approval on this. I'm just kind of winging it. So let's keep it tempered down for right now. And I'm just kind of, hoping that I'm giving myself a little bit of luck by being generous to the people here.
Yeah,
and I'm a bit of a heater.
No, you are a man of the people. I mean, you are the people. Yeah, you have a belt that says People's Champ on it. Pretty much.
Somewhere around here.
Yeah. All right. We appreciate everybody hanging. We got to get out of here. Thanks again. Thumbs up, subscribe. We'll see you soon. Enjoy the day. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. And we'll talk to you next week.